What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a very interesting knife from the Spyderco Taichung, Taiwan factory. This is the new Spyderco Amalgam. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Very interesting knife, very large knife. We're going to go over this. First, let's go ahead and get some measurements as per usual here. So the overall length on this guy, and you know, I said big knife. I mean, this is a big knife. We're looking at just shy of 9 inches overall. Looks to be about, yeah, it's just shy of 9 inches overall. You can see there. The butt's at a little bit of an angle, so it might look a little more off to you than it is to me, but just shy of 9 inches there. Overall blade length looks to be just about, gosh, just about 4 inches. Just shy of 4 inches with a cutting edge of about 3.5 because you do have a forward choil there. Let's get this guy's weight. The first official real weight for, use of my scale here. I've been kind of using it or forcing use of it in the unboxing videos just because I wanted to, but now we can actually use it there. So overall weight on this guy looks to be about 4.27. Let's give it another go just to make sure. 4.27, so about 4.25. Interesting. Crazy light in my opinion, very light for an exceptionally large knife. Let's do some size comparisons here real quick. First up, the Ontario Rat Model 1. You can see there, the Rat 1 being about 8.6 inches overall. This is still quite a bit larger than the Rat 1. Let's move these down a little bit. I always get these a little high when I do size comparisons. How about the Spyderco Paramilitary 2? Let's stack that up against this guy. Paramilitary 2 coming in at about 8.3, 8.4 inches overall, somewhere in there. How about the Benchmade Griptilian? Benchmade Griptilian coming in at about 8 inches overall. And last but not least, the Spyderco Delica. Spyderco Delica coming in at about 7 inches overall. So let's go over the anatomy of this knife real quick. We have a satin finished drop point blade, really nicely satin finished blade. You've got, of course, the thumb hole opener. You do have a forward choil here with some standard Spyderco jimping up on top. No thumb ramp, it's just flat back here. This knife operates with both the compression lock and a flipper, which is very new, I think, for Spyderco. I've never actually seen. Maybe I'm not sure how the domino operates, but I'm not used to seeing a flipper on a Spyderco. We'll talk about its operation here in a little bit, but the disengagement for the lock is a compression lock. Now on the scales, you do have very mildly textured peel ply carbon fiber. Let's see if we can get these to focus. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get an up close. I wish I could show you guys kind of exactly what this looks like, but I don't know that it's going to work with me. It's a laminate though. So this material right here is G10. It's a very thin laminate. I'm not going to be able to catch it on camera, but it absolutely 100% is not carbon fiber all the way through, in case anybody was wondering. This is an open body pillar construction. You do have some milling in there on the liners. They are countersunk, so the combination of the milling and the countersunk steel liners are what's keeping the weight down on this guy. You've got a actually multi-directional carry positions here. Tip up, tip down, right or left-handed carry. Though I will say it's pretty much a right-handed knife. Given the path of the flipper tab and how you would have to disengage it with your left hand, it's just asking for a situation where you're going to drop it, because you need to disengage it and then move your thumb so that flipper tab can come through. So it's not going to make a whole lot of sense unless lefties, if you're like, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about, and you go ahead and buy it, I promise you're going to be disappointed with that. I just want to say that right off the bat. Lefties are really not going to like this thing, despite it having positions, multiple positions for the pocket clip. So just keep that in mind. We'll talk more about the flipper tab and the compression lock here in a little bit. You do have a very standard Spyderco pocket clip here. You can see it is pretty much exactly the same thing that you see on the Golden Colorado Spyderco knives. I'm a huge fan of that. Love the pocket clip. The position in this knife's case is in a great spot. so no complaints there. And then you've got a teeny tiny little lanyard hole that will probably be kind of frustrating if you're a lanyard person. I'm not, so I don't really care about that. Opening this knife, you can use the flipper tab. You can easily open it in the reverse thumb flick or finger flick, and you can also open it in the standard flick. So, very interesting. Very good, you know, as far as how it's put together, it's put together very well. It's very interesting. So a little bit of history on this. This was designed by a gentleman named Brian Lai. It was refined a little bit by Spyderco, but it was designed by Brian Lai. You can see here on the back of the blade, it actually has his logo there, the LAI. I'll tell you what, here's what I'm going to do. I'll go over it real quick, but it actually explains all of this in the pamphlet that it comes with. So if you guys want to pause and read this real quick, feel free to do so. Basically, he was in college, he was a mechanical engineer student, and they, I guess, from what I understand, they did this thing where they were to build a 3/4 scale hybrid basically race car, or a race car with a hybrid engine. And so he was always needing a pocket knife. He was always having to borrow his friends, and you know, he ended up buying one for himself and started getting into pocket knives, but he really, you know, he liked the idea of a flipper, but that wasn't a thing at the time for Spyderco. He was using his knives for stuff like, you know, cutting through styrofoam, cutting through cardboard, cutting through zip ties. So he needed a fairly hard-use folding knife, but one that was single-hand operation, but had that feel of a Spyderco, you know, with the thumb hole. That was very, you know, something he wanted. So he actually created like a foam model and presented it to Spyderco, and they were like, yeah, we like this. And after a little bit of refinement, this is what they came up with. So you ended up with this hybridization of the compression lock and the flipper tab. Let's go over fit and finish real quick. This was one of the first Taiching Taiwan Spydercos that I had ever handled my entire life. And I will say everything came perfect. It's exactly as people described. Excellent fit and finish. No issues whatsoever there. I'm very, very impressed with this knife overall. The grind lines are amazing, exceptionally. I mean, the blade in particular is very, very beautiful. So I was very impressed and very happy to see that was the case. It's also extremely smooth. This is a knife that runs on bearings, and the action is incredibly smooth. So as far as lockup, absolutely solid up, down, left, and right, which is generally the case with a compression lock. All of the lines meet up. You don't have anything hanging over or creating a situation where there's not symmetry. Absolutely, fantastic there. Nothing to complain about in terms of fit and finish. Let's go ahead and do the paper cut test. And as you guys could imagine here, with a blade having a stock thickness of, let's compare it to the Paramilitary 2. Looks to be almost the same as a PM2. I'm going to guess it's 0.145. That's what it looks like here, to me. Let me get this to focus again. We're having a lot of trouble focusing today. Yeah, that looks to be about the case. But how the blade's ground, I'm going to guess, I have not cut anything with this yet, but I'm going to guess that this thing is going to slice very well. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so yeah, this is an excellent slicer. Absolutely, wow, unbelievable. That's an awesome slicer. I expected it to be good, but truthfully, I hadn't done it up until just now. I just thought I would just, do it on camera like I always do and just be like, yeah, well, that's pretty good, and then move on. It slices really well. That's awesome. Very impressed with that blade. Considering, that it actually is a fairly hard use oriented blade. I mean, you can see there the robustness carried down all the way to the tip. You have an extremely functional drop point blade that's been flat ground, has the thumb hole, and makes use of, just kind of maximizes utility there. So the fact that it slices really well is just a blessing. I know that seems silly to be like, and on top of it, it actually cuts well. Well, it's one of those things. And by that, of course, I mean, oftentimes we overlook what should be expected at base from a knife, and that's that it cuts well. And we there are all these other things to consider now that we've all gotten so neck deep in the knife world. We want all of these different things from our blade. We want it to be, we want it to stand up to hard use. We want it to have a tip that's not going to break. We want it to have reasonable thickness, but not super thick, not super thin. Well, everybody's different. Some people really want a thin blade, but there's all these different things that we want, and then it's almost an afterthought to be like, oh, and of course I want the edge geometry to emphasize, really, really good cutting ability. Most people, of course, want that from their knives, but it gets buried in your subconscious when you're considering all of these other things. I hope what I'm saying is making sense. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that good a performance from the Amalgam, so that is really cool. Let's go over ergonomics. This is going to be a quick category because, in my opinion, the ergonomics on this thing are just hand-melting perfect. I have medium, large size hands, and maybe this is just another knife that's just almost made perfectly for my hands, but oh my gosh. Hats off to the ergos on this thing. It just perfect. No hot spots whatsoever. The chamfering around the edges and things, it leaves no sharp corners, no hot spots anywhere. The clip is in a great spot. The primary choil, the flipper tab, the forward choil, the jimp, just absolutely perfect ergonomics. Even in the reverse grip, which is not a grip that I'll really, I think, ever use a knife in, but absolutely perfect ergonomics. A huge fan of the ergonomics there. Let's talk about the price. Price on these guys is $175. These are not made in the United States. They're made in Taichung, Taiwan, which is something I used to shy away from on the Spyderco line. I did not know that most people regard the Taichung, Taiwan plant as having better fit and finish and overall quality than the Golden, Colorado factory. That was something that I only recently learned. So I know, if you're like me, you just don't like seeing Taiwan on the blade. And my reasoning for that is when I run into a lot of people in Kansas who carry knives but aren't knife guys, or they carry knives and they like knives, but the only things that they have ever experienced are Kershaw, Gerber, SOG. Those are good knives to those people, and that's, I'm not saying they're not good knives. I'm saying that everybody's got different tiers that they graduate through, and around here in these smaller towns, you might find a retailer that's carrying Benchmade. So most people see stuff like that, and then they think Benchmade is like this ultra supreme, like the top of the top. Benchmade makes great knives too, but I'm saying that their viewpoints are skewed. And furthermore, Benchmade being one of the only USA production knives that's available around here, not only are they equating high cost to Benchmade, but they are associating the high cost to the USA made knives thing, and which is something that I, myself hold things like that in high regard. But when let's say Joe Bob is showing me his Gerber, and I'm like, hey, take a look at this. He's not going to know. All he's going to see is that Taiwan. So he's going to think that this is, in the same caliber as the knife he's showing me. I don't like Gerber. I'll just go ahead and say that, and this is like a very specific scenario, but I promise you it happens to me more often than you'd think. And it shouldn't bother me that much. It shouldn't even be something that's really all that important to me. But seeing Taiwan on a blade, to me and anybody else that's handling a knife like this for the first time, they're immediately going to go, oh, it's kind of a cheap knife. Regardless of how it feels, once you see that, that's what people think. Now, you and I, most of the people watching this video and myself are going to know this is not a cheap knife. This is one of those scenarios where, yes, it is made in Taiwan, but it is made or held to a standard of quality that is very high. Tolerances are taken into consideration. The fit and finish, the fitment of all the hardware, all that's taken into consideration. On top of that, they are using premium materials. Despite this being a laminate, G10 is, of course, still a very good material for the handle. And CPM S30V, which we have not talked about, is a fantastic steel for an everyday carry knife. That's what this is. I'm just looking for where it's actually printed. It's printed right there under Spyderco, which, yeah, you can see it there. So anyways, kind of went off on a tangent there. Yeah, I don't like Taiwan being printed on the blade, despite knowing that this is a knife that's made really, really well. So anyways, price on this guy, 175 bucks. There's a lot of competition in that price range, but I feel like it's a decent price on this knife. You know, there are knives where I'm like, you know, like let's use the Shaman, for example. The Shaman G10 S30V. Yeah, it's contoured. It's running on phosphor bronze. It's made in the United States. For whatever reason, $181 for the Shaman versus $175 for this after having handled it. This feels a little bit better. You know, yeah, I mean, at 160, would it be better? I mean, we could say that about any knife. For 10, 15 bucks less, would it be better? Sure, absolutely. You know, for 175 bucks less, this knife would be the best knife in the world, you know, if it were free. But it feels like an okay price. That's just me. Carry philosophy on this guy. If you're looking for a knife that is, you know, let's say you're working in a shop, if you're working outside, you know, construction site, basically a hard use scenario. You're going to be cutting zip ties. You're going to be cutting cardboard, wood, rubber. You're kind of going to be getting into stuff like that. This is an excellent knife considering those things. Now, keep in mind, it's running on bearings, so you might get, you know, stuff gunked up in those bearings. It is open body, so it shouldn't be too hard to simply blow or clean out. The biggest thing here, the biggest turnoff, is going to be the relationship between the flipper tab and the compression lock back here. This has a light detent, so you have to get used to it. I'm making it look easy, but it's got a light detent. It also has a very uncomfortable place where and I'm a Hinderer fan, and I know XM18s have a bad spot when they're coming down here and your fingers pressing against this area right here and slamming into that jimping. This is worse than that, and it's really that corner of the compression lock that creates the issue there. So that corner of the compression lock is where your finger is going to come down. Plus, when you release this, you have to move your finger out of the way because that thing's coming back through. And when you do that, you're repositioning your finger and you're holding onto the knife like this, and you're also trying to swing it just perfectly to where that detent catches it at the end, but it doesn't bounce back out like that. So you're having to think about doing all this every time you're closing it. You know, you can disengage it and do this, but it's so many different hand movements that I found myself a couple of times accidentally almost dropping it. And that's why I say lefties will hate this, because you flip this thing over and the only finger you can use for disengagement on that compression lock is your thumb. Your thumb is critical to holding on to this knife. So you do this, and then you got to reposition your fingers into a bad spot, and you got to move your thumb and then get up here. It's not going to be worth it. I know there are people going, I'm going to go ahead and get it anyway. You're really going to be disappointed if you're left-handed there. So those are pretty major complaints there, but I needed to make sure that they were pointed out. Now, with that being the case, or that being said, I will say this is a very fun knife to use for the reverse flick, and it also works perfectly fine for the standard thumb flick. The light detent creates a problem, and you know that spot back here where your finger's slamming into that makes a problem, and the flipper tab passing through the path where you have to disengage it, that's all a problem. But a lot of that could have been alleviated by just making it have a heavier detent. Honestly, if this had a heavier detent, I might even overlook some of that other stuff. It's just coming to a situation where there's a chance that you're not going to quite flick it out all the way. You know, I mean, it's going to most of the time, but it's a pretty short flipper tab. And until you're used to it, you are going to run into situations where it does that. And I mean, yeah, it's false shedding, it's nice, but it's kind of just, it's a bummer, you know? And I was very attracted to the aesthetics of this knife alone. You know, I thought, man, that looks like a great knife. But that's an issue. So really, seriously, two things, you know, as far as the, you know, it would be better if category that I usually do. Number one, this tab here, it's this corner that's causing the issue. This space between this corner and the top of this liner before it starts to turn into jimping, why don't you just bring the metal up a little, you know, well, I'm saying this like I'm speaking directly to Spyderco, but if Spyderco would bring that up a little bit higher, your finger would be less likely to land right on the corner of that because it's wanting to come down right on that corner. So maybe if they brought it up just a little bit, it may not be that big of a deal. I don't know. That may not fix things. It would also be nice if the flipper tab was just a little teeny tiny bit longer, or maybe angled up a little bit more that way, or I don't know. You know, this is a small pointy flipper tab to hang on to, and that, you know, it's uncomfortable. This sounds so nitpicky, but it's kind of uncomfortable here, and slamming it down into the corner of that compression lock is also uncomfortable. And then of course the detent absolutely needs to be heavier. If only one of those changes is made, just make the detent heavier, or get rid of the flipper tab altogether. And I know then essentially what we have there is just a modified version or a more hard use version of the Paramilitary 2. But truthfully, that's more of, you know, in line with what I would like there. One of those lines of change there would be excellent. Truthfully, it really is easy to flick this thing out in reverse, easy to flick this thing out with the thumb. It's awesome. And I have no doubt in my mind that this knife could absolutely stand up to some serious use. And I think people who do use it are really going to enjoy using it. It's just not a joy to disengage and put back into the hand, or put the blade away. And it's also just a bummer to flip. Like you look at it and you're like, oh, this is going to feel really good. And then you flip it and you're like, ugh. I don't know what to think about that. And then every time you do it, it just kind of bums you out a little bit more. So some changes need to be made there. Final conclusions, if you can overlook the flipper tab thing, you don't mind a light detent, you don't mind your finger coming down on the back of this, then you're going to love this knife, because those are the only bad things that I can say about it. I cannot 100% recommend this knife as like my, you know, one of the top EDC knives that I've ever handled. It's good. It's just not. There's some changes that need to be made, but, you know, make no mistake, I do really like this knife, and I hope that Spyderco evolves it, because it's really cool. It's a great idea. You know, the combination of the flipper tab with the compression lock is awesome. Which, by the way, I don't know if I went over this. The definition of amalgam is essentially you know, a mashup or combining different things. So that's what happened here, you know, with Lai's, you know, interest in certain production knives, his interest in the flipper tab, and his interest in certain Spyderco models. They sort of mashed that all together and came up with this. So I think that's a very fitting name. Very cool knife, very interesting knife. Couple of things need to be changed, but if you can overlook those little things that I talked about, I think you'll really enjoy this knife. And as you saw from my cutting test, this thing just slices your paper. I'm actually going to do this again on camera. That's how much I enjoyed that. Oh, I can't tell you how much of a joy that is to cut paper with this guy. That blade is ground in just an excellent way. That's awesome. Anyways, guys, that is pretty much it for today. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like. So please check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, then please subscribe to my channel, because there's definitely more coming. As you all know, if you watch the unboxing videos, there's a lot of cool stuff coming next week. We've got both of those customs to review. I was going to do one today, but I need to talk with Mark Skaggs from Todd Begg Knives about the design philosophy behind both of those knives. Since they were so expensive and they were custom knives, I really don't want to do either of them injustice on a review. So I really want to get as much information as possible before I review them. So we're going to do that. They'll be out next week, along with all the stuff that we unboxed. And then we've got even more knives coming from some of the knives you guys suggested in my video about, you know, what knives do you want to see reviewed on this channel. So anyways, stay tuned. Thanks for watching and have a great day.